As Catherine said, my name is Samantha. I'm interning with the Clare Boothe Policy Institute. It's a great internship. I would recommend it to all of you. But today I have the pleasure of introducing Marji Ross, so just get right to it. Marji Ross comes to us from Regnery Publishing, the preeminent conservative publishing house, where she has served as both president and publisher since 2003. She has been lauded not only as a frontrunner in the publishing world, but as a successful conservative entrepreneur. Under her leadership, Regnery has succeeded in putting over 50 of its books on the New York Times bestseller list over the last 12 years, which is a very impressive feat in the publishing industry. Prior to her work at Regnery, Ms. Ross served as a senior group publisher for Phillips International, where she oversaw several business units as well as health newsletters. Marji graduated from Dartmouth College with a BA in English, and later went on to earn her master's in journalism from American University. She balances her professional endeavors with family life as a devoted wife and mother to 3 daughters. She currently serves on the boards of the National Conservative Campaign Fund, the Clare Boothe Policy Institute, and the Beth Kai Congregation. In 2005, she was named Woman of the Year by the Clare Boothe Policy Institute, and we're thrilled to have her here with us today. So please help me welcome Marji Ross. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Samantha, Catherine, Michelle, all the Clare Boothe ladies. Thank you. It's wonderful to see you all. You're having a great day. I caught a little bit of Gabrielle's speech right before lunch, and she had a lot of wonderful advice for all of you, so some of which I may be repeating. So if you hear something more than once, then that means you really ought to write it down. It's worth remembering. So as you heard, I'm Marji Ross. I'm the president of Regnery. We are the preeminent conservative book publisher in the country. I'm also mother of Sarah, Trina, and Rebecca Ross, wife of Chuck Amante. So usually when I get up here, I just introduce myself as president and publisher of Regnery, because that's the platform from which I usually speak. And I give a lot of speeches on business and politics, current events in book publishing, conservative media, how to get your first job, secrets that I've learned from best-selling authors. But today, I introduced myself by listing all 3 of my jobs, because I actually have 3 full-time jobs: publisher, mother, wife. And I consider them all to be my full-time jobs. And truly none of them is you could call a part-time job, because on some level I am doing all of them all the time. So my challenge today is to explain to you how I do that, and how you might approach the prospect of combining career and family in your own life. So I'll start at the beginning. The beginning of my adult life, when I graduated from college and set off to find my first job. I knew I liked writing, I liked editing, I liked publishing and communications, so I found a job as a writer for a public relations firm here in DC. I was young, I was single, I was determined, so I worked harder than anyone else there. And I just threw myself into the job. I committed to learning everything I could about that field and just getting a little bit better every day. And that wasn't tough, because I really was not very good at the beginning, so I could improve. I had lots of room for improvement. But I just decided to be the most productive person in the office. If I could just produce more work, at least they would hopefully find me valuable. And I got better just from sheer practice, and I got noticed for working hard. And so I learned how to write a good press release, and how to organize a press event, and how to get media interested in a story. I learned a lot about commercial real estate, because that was the area of expertise for this publicity firm. But more than that, I learned 2 really important things from my first boss. And she was the owner of a small PR agency, a typical entrepreneur, but not so typical back in the early 80s. She was a woman entrepreneur. She had started her own business, and she was running her own business in a very male-dominated field, commercial development and real estate and construction was a very male-dominated field, and she had carved this niche for herself with a firm that serviced a lot of the companies that had all men at the top of those companies. And she had been growing this firm for about 15 years. It had a lot of big corporate clients. And what I learned from her was, first of all, I learned the importance of service. Because I came in, I think, thinking that for a woman to be successful in that kind of man's world, she had to be really tough. She had to be really almost masculine. She had to, kind of cover up the fact that she was a woman. And she did the opposite in a lot of ways. She actually, I think, certainly didn't hide the fact that she was a woman, but didn't hide the traits and the benefits that she brought to the job that you were uniquely female. And frankly, there were things that none of those men knew how to do or were any good at. And they really appreciated having her there. And the way she approached her job, again, was not to be, the bossiest, hardest edged person in the room so she could prove how she could go toe-to-toe with the men in the business, but rather she focused on service, on being helpful. And I remember noticing this for the first time when we were at a big press event where we were hosting an open house for a big new residential client. And the CEO of the development company was there. And there was a big crowd. There were photographers and journalists, and they were all clamoring to get an interview with this pretty important, actually, CEO builder in Washington, D.C. And Suzanne was her name. Suzanne sort of gracefully took his arm, steered him through the crowd of people, always with a smile, always charming, got him to the place where he was talking to the most important press person that was there, which was the interview she was trying to arrange. And then she just sort of very quietly took his jacket and held his drink while he conducted this interview. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, God, she's like, his maid. She's being so subservient. But that was completely wrong. Actually, she was making sure that he got the interview he needed, which she had arranged, and she made herself indispensable to him. She made sure that he was successful, and frankly, her job was getting his company great publicity. So she was a great success. And I really respected the fact that she wasn't afraid to do the little things that enabled him to get that interview. She wasn't afraid to hold his drink. It didn't demean her at all. It was part of the job. It was fine. And it actually enabled him to get a really great profile in the Washington Post, which not only made him look good, but it did wonders for her career too, because she was the person who arranged that. And it just really made an impression upon me that a really important part of a lot of jobs, even CEO jobs, is service. And I really took that to heart and tried to make sure that I incorporated that into my not just life experience, but hopefully into my career as well as I went on. I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to have the judgment to know what the client needed, and then to be able to sort of seamlessly deliver that. And I wanted to have the confidence to take a supporting role, because I think ultimately it was her self-confidence that enabled her to be supportive and to be of service to him, as opposed to trying to be in charge. I learned that in a lot of ways, this was another really important lesson. I learned how valuable it is, how important it is to be valued by the people you work with, and not to necessarily play for the public accolades. For a lot of my career, I have been a ghostwriter, and people who know me think, really? You're okay with that, being a ghostwriter, and somebody else's name is on the book, the article, the whatever? And the thing that I have learned is one of the secrets to being really successful in your career is being valued by the people you work closest with, and not worrying about being famous or being valued by the public. And I found out that a lot of times when you are valued by the former, you wind up admired by the latter. I learned something else from Suzanne Ives, my first boss. I learned something from what she was missing in her life. She was single. She had no children. She went home at night. Every night she went home to an empty house. She had a dog, actually. She went home to her dog. But she did not have a husband. She did not have a family. She certainly had friends, but she didn't have a life partner to share her joys and her triumphs and her frustrations and her sorrows, her worries, her fears. And I will tell you, over my life so far, I have known many successful women, but the happy ones are happily married. So I left this small public relations firm run by Suzanne Ives to become a junior editor at the Washington Business Journal. And this was a great next job for me because I love business and I love journalism. I had studied it. And so in the second job, I could combine my love of writing and editing with my interest in the subject matter. And, you know, I know you probably hear advice a lot that is just do what you love. And it sounds impossible. You're like, well, sure, I could do what I love, but who's going to pay me for that? How do I do that? And I guess I encourage you to think about that a little bit differently. I don't mean that you are going to have your dream job immediately, because you won't. Almost no one lands their first job as their dream job, and frankly, you know, it takes a long time to get to your dream job, and by the time you get there, it probably wasn't what you thought your dream job was when you started out. But every job is made up of a lot of things that you do, a lot of tasks, a lot of assignments, a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. And so in all of those things, there are a lot of opportunities for you to find the parts of the job that you love. And what I have found when I look back is that a successful career is often made up of starting with one little piece of the job that you love, and then each job that you get after that, you can add a few more pieces of things that you like, so that gradually a bigger and bigger percentage of the things that you spend your day doing are things that you actually love doing. And it can be anything. You know, maybe like I did, you love to write and edit. Maybe you like to work with people or with numbers, solve problems, puzzles. Maybe you like to organize things, plan things, be creative, design. In every single job, from waitress to restaurant owner, from administrative assistant to chief executive officer, you will find those things, some piece of every one of those things in that job. So my next job was to be the editor of a newsletter for the American Institute of Architects. That was a fun job. Architecture is really interesting. There's design, there's function, there's beauty, there's social policy, and I discovered the world of newsletters. So, you know how I said that your dream job probably by the time you get there isn't what you thought it was. Well, that's another really important thing that I learned in this job, because I had never almost even heard of newsletters. I didn't know that was a whole field. I didn't know there was a giant industry of newsletters. But I got this job and discovered that it was a lot of fun. It was a great platform, and it really was a stepping stone for me to get probably my most important next job, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But along the way, all this time, I was single. So I had friends and family supporting me, but I wasn't married yet. I had boyfriends along the way, more than one serious relationship, but I hadn't found the man I wanted to marry. So that changed when I went to my next job. I went to work for Tom Phillips at Phillips Publishing. And once again, I got the chance to combine several things that I love. So I combined editing and financial investment newsletters and journalism, and put them all together. And along the way, as it happened, one of the people who interviewed me for my job at Phillips wound up becoming my husband. So, my first husband. but I'll get to that in a minute. Now, I didn't go into the job looking for a husband, and I didn't know when I was interviewing with Mac Ross that that's what I was interviewing for. Thought I was interviewing for a job as a junior editor, but we worked together, and ultimately we fell in love, got married, and as I was getting closer and closer to my dream job, I also was getting closer and closer to the point where I really knew that I wanted to start a family. I approached this job the same way I had approached my previous jobs. I looked for what I love to do, and I committed to being the hardest working person, the most productive person around. And I just wrote a lot, edited a lot, raised my hand all the time. I can do that, I'll do that, I'll help with that. I kept in mind some of the other lessons, which I encourage you to remember about service and support, about gaining the respect of the people that you work with, rather than worrying about fame and bylines and accolades. As I was working and developing in this new job, I got to know the man who interviewed me, and he and I had similar jobs. And he was already very good at his job, and he helped me become better at mine. We enjoyed each other's company. We respected each other's intelligence and job skills. We discovered that we had a lot of common interests, dreams, values. Much like Emma in Jane Austen, I discovered one day that the person that was my best friend was also the person that I had fallen in love with. I'll pause for a minute and give you a commercial interruption. We published a couple years ago a book called The Jane Austen Guide to Happily Ever After. And I mention that book because I believe in a lot of ways it's one of the best volumes, well, I know of, for providing insight onto what makes a good marriage and what makes a good match and some of the pitfalls along the way. And very much like my own story, the book, and Jane Austen, rejects the myth that finding someone compatible and appropriate is unromantic. On the contrary, it can be the most romantic path possible. And it's also one that's much more likely to lead, in my opinion, to true happiness, which is another subject we'll come back to in a minute. So in the 13 years that I worked at Phillips Publishing, my life blossomed professionally, personally. I started there as an assistant managing editor, which just meant a very junior editor. Eventually, I became a senior group publisher. I was running business units. And I went from the single Marji Grant to the married Marji Ross with 3 daughters. So let me just share with you, I think, a few secrets of my success. And I think they'll be helpful. I hope they'll be enlightening. I think they're all important. First of all, I was lucky enough to find a company to work for that values family. And I think that is actually not that hard to find. But I recommend, as you navigate your career, that's not usually something that's going to be on the corporate website. It's not going to be in your job description. But I think as you interview places and certainly get the experience of working in a place and talking to other people who work there, you can get a sense of whether or not a company values family. And I think that's really important. In my job, I was working very hard, and I actually didn't take off a whole lot of time for maternity leave each time I had a daughter, but my employer was very, very flexible about letting me do the things I needed to do as long as I had gotten my work done, and allowing me to be where my daughters needed me to be. Not every day, not every hour. There were trade-offs and times when I'm sure my daughters would have liked me to be home more, and I wasn't. But very often I was able to adjust my schedule for my daughters. And frankly, I think a lot of that flexibility is something you can earn. Again, if you are the hardest working person and you prove that you work hard and produce a lot and you're very dedicated to making sure that projects are done and deadlines are met, you can earn the latitude and the flexibility to have some time to adjust your schedule and have time that you can use when you need to be with your family. Part of it is the kind of job you choose. It depends on what kind of career you go into. My sister, for instance, is a midwife. And so when somebody goes into labor, she's got to be there. It really doesn't matter what else is going on. But she has a different kind of flexibility because she works in shifts. And if someone goes into labor, when she's on call, she goes in and delivers the baby. But when she's off, she's off. So that's, there are different kinds of flexibility you can find in jobs. And that works for her. She has 2 daughters. She's very devoted to them. And she gets to spend a lot of time with them because she's on a job that's on shifts. And so I guess my point is there are many different types of flexibility, and you have to look for the one that makes sense for you. I think the other secret, certainly for my ability to grow both my career and my family at the same time, was having the right husband. My husband wanted children as much as I did. He was committed to being involved in their lives. He didn't hesitate at any role, changing diapers, driving forgotten homework to school. This happens more than you think. Chaperoning field trips, attending school plays and concerts and lots of soccer games. And his devotion to our family was an essential part of our happiness. And I encourage you to look for a good husband who meets, in my opinion, those criteria. And then, when I was 46, and my daughters were 16, 14, and 9, he died. And I felt many things: shock, grief. I felt like a planet that had been thrown out of orbit. That kind of whatever had kept my world connected and orderly was gone. And my daughters saved me. They wrapped their love around me, and together we faced a new life without him. And I learned several more things. I learned the amazing kindness and selflessness of people. I had hoped that was true, but I never experienced it until I needed it. And I didn't ever think I was going to need it. I don't like to think of myself as a needy person. So maybe in that way it was even more surprising, both that I found it and that I needed it. I learned that keeping busy and surrounded by people is therapeutic. This time, this was not something that helped advance my career. Service was the single best way for me to recover from grief. I dove into volunteering, and within a year I was on 4 different boards. I was volunteering my time to help my college alumni group, my congregation, this wonderful organization, and several others. And that helped me recover as well. So I have to go back a little bit in my career and explain that a few years before this all happened, I had made the move from Phillips Publishing to Regnery. And so I went from the world of newsletters to the world of books. And so this truly was my dream job, is my dream job for a girl who loved nothing more than reading books. The idea of becoming the president and publisher of one of the most prestigious independent publishing companies in the country is a dream come true. But it's a big job. It's a demanding job. It's an all-encompassing job. So how do I do that job and my other full-time jobs of wife and mother? To be honest, for a long time, I did the mother part better than the wife part. So let me start with that. I adore my 3 daughters, as anyone who spends more than 5 minutes with me will know. They're amazing, they're smart, they're funny, they're kind, they're wise, they're like a lot of you, actually. They're practical, articulate, engaging, I could go on. But from very early on, I treated them as amazing people. And therefore I had very high expectations from them, extremely high. And I didn't set those to test them or to stress them out, although I may have done the latter, but simply because I truly expect them to be outstanding, to be extraordinary, to be great. I realize that sounds like a lot of pressure, and I've talked to my daughters a lot about this. We often joke about it, and I think they know, because I've told them many times, and they've told me this themselves, that my high expectations for them are an expression of my extremely high opinion of them. They don't always succeed, they don't always excel, but they know I believe in them, and they always try to do well and to do the right thing. And so I have great confidence in them, not to be perfect, but to do their best. That's my recipe for motherhood, I guess, for being a mom. There are a couple other things I do as a mother, I have done that I think help explain our happiness. The first one is, and this is has been pretty important to me, combining work and family, and that is I combine work and family. I actually involve my daughters a lot in what I do. It's not really that hard. Books, I mean, everybody understands books. They like books. Books, we go into the bookstore, we go into the library. I talk about work, I explain what I do, I share funny stories, I bring home book jackets and say, which one do you like? We're picking which one, we have these three choices, which one do you think would be the best? And I ask their opinions about titles and story ideas. They go into bookstores and look for our books and put them on the front of the shelf and put the other competition down on the lower shelves. It's a little game. They talk about what I do with their friends. They pay attention to current events and politics because it's part of my job. At first because it was part of my job, and now because they actually have begun to appreciate the importance of that in their own lives. And I take their advice. I listen to their input. I value their opinion, and they know that. When I was a kid, a large part of my own happiness was knowing that my mom thought I was great. And I just felt certain that she thought that. And when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I remember wondering, and this thought really crossed my mind, what if I don't feel that way? What if when my daughter or son, because I didn't know, was born, what if I'm just not sure? What if I just don't have that sense of certainty that they are wonderful? Because if I'm not sure, they'll surely know it. But I will tell you, the grace of God takes care of that. As soon as I held each daughter in my arms, I knew she was amazing. And because I felt it, she was. Now, there are times when my daughters and I have argued. My middle daughter, Trina, is a true perfectionist. And I know this because one day she said to me, Mom, people say I'm a perfectionist, but I know I'm not, because look at all these things I do that aren't perfect. Yes, that would be the definition of a perfectionist. So that's led us to some arguments and head butters, including the time that she yelled at me for putting her clothes in the dryer. I said I was just trying to help. She said I hate help. So I took her next load of laundry out, which was wet and clean, and dumped it on the front lawn of our house. That I did. And that is not a suggestion for how to be a great mom. But it's just a reminder that happiness isn't perfect. The other thing that I've tried to teach my daughters, and I very much encourage you to teach your children this when you have them, is how to interact with adults. I've stressed the importance of that with my daughters, about looking adults in the eye when you talk to them. You ladies know this. Don't forget to teach your kids this. How important it is to look an adult in the eye when you talk to them, to speak clearly when you're asked a question, to answer clearly, to listen politely, to take adults seriously. This has served my daughters very well in school and social settings. They've often told me how much they value that, how much they're recognized for that, how much they notice how few of their friends do that. And so, this whole question of how does one balance family and career, motherhood and work, and I usually tell people that I don't think of it as a balance. I think of it more as a blend. I don't think of these two things as separate parts of my life. I like to think of it as sort of a big stew where everything's mixed together and all the ingredients help make the stew more tasty. I have a cousin who's a very successful children's author. And so she has a completely different kind of life and career. She works for herself. She writes mostly from home. She has 2 sons. And she told me that she discounts the idea of balance. She rejects the idea of balance as well as kind of the wrong metaphor. Her metaphor, so I promised I'd give her credit for this, is sailing. And when you're sailing, you can't go straight, any of you sailors know this, you can't go straight at your destination. You have to tack. So you go a little bit in this direction, and that looks like you're going a little bit more toward the family side. Then you turn, and you go a little bit more in this direction, more towards the business side. So at different points in your life and different days of the week, you may be emphasizing, you may be going slightly more in one direction, slightly more in the other, but you're always headed towards that sort of perfect destination, which is the combination of both parts of your life. And I thought that was a useful analogy as well. So I told you a few minutes ago, I confessed, that for a long time I was more focused on being a good mother than being a good wife. To be honest, I was worried a great deal about being a good mother. I didn't ask myself very often what it meant to be a good wife. And I find it interesting now in pop culture that it's kind of cool and PC to be a mom. Like all these famous celebrities are having children, and you open up People magazine and most of the photographs are of movie stars and actresses and models with kids. But you hardly ever see a husband. The husband seems to be either irrelevant or non-existent. So it seems to me that while being a mother nowadays is really PC, being a good wife is still pretty unfashionable and maybe vaguely shameful. When my first husband got sick, I found myself thinking a lot about what it means to be a good wife. Not just the in sickness and in health part, but just the whole question of support and service, of celebrating the amazingness of my spouse in the same way that I did my daughter's, of caring more about his happiness and comfort than my own. As the head of Regnery, I get plenty of recognition. I work with big celebrities, influential politicians, all the time. But the person who has my back, who will cheer for me when I have a big bestseller and comfort me when I have a flop, is my husband. And so when you find the right husband, you have to accept the responsibility of being a good wife. So remember to cheer for him, too. To ask yourself what makes him happy. What makes him feel important. What makes him feel proud of himself. Make sure he knows that you think he's amazing. My youngest daughter got invited to the prom yesterday. She'd die if she knew I was telling this. But all of her friends had already been asked. Oh, please don't tell her this is horrible. I can't believe I'm telling this story. All of her friends had already been asked. The prom is Saturday. And she's in a big group of friends, but she doesn't have a boyfriend, and started to get a little bit anxious about who she was going to go with. And so there's a guy, I shouldn't say his name, there's a boy in her grade, she's a junior in high school, who came over to the house yesterday with half a dozen roses and a big sign that said prom, ? I know, and asked him. And I said, well, I haven't heard this kid's name a lot. I know most of her friends. She said, yeah, Mom, he's really, really quiet. And I just don't know, I'm really glad that he asked me, but I don't know if we're going to have a really good time because he's so quiet. And I said to her, I said, you know what? You need to have a whole different attitude. You need to ask yourself, what is is going to make him have a good time? I mean, other than the obvious. I think I might have said that. But innocently. What's going to make it fun for him? You know, is it going to be talking a lot, talking a little, find out what he likes, what he's interested in, and try to find a way to talk about that. But so seldom we ask ourselves what's going to make the other person happy. And of course, the secret is no longer a secret. When you ask yourself and you think about what's going to make the other person happy, usually it makes you happier too. And it will. So, the ending of my story, or up to now. Eventually, after several years after I lost my first husband, I began to think about dating again. I knew I didn't want to live alone. I don't really like being alone. I like having a partner. And my first husband had given me many things, including he gave me a great gift, which is when he was very sick, he told me that he didn't want me to be alone for the rest of my life. And he said that sort of famous movie thing he did. You know, when I'm gone, I want you to find somebody else. And of course at the time I said, don't talk about that. But it was a great gift, and not every woman who loses somebody has that. But he gave that to me. And so eventually I found Chuck, my current husband. And in many ways he's very different from my first husband, but in a few essential ways, he's not. He's very smart. He's very articulate, and he loves language and books the way I do. He's also deeply generous with his love. He's proud of what I do. He joins me in getting excited about new books and authors. He listens to me when I complain about a problem. He counsels me to be patient, and he helps me remember to be my better self. I'm very lucky. I know a lot of my success has been the happy accident of good timing. But being successful is not the same as being happy. And I believe too many women, and men for that matter, chase after success and leave happiness behind. The title of this speech is Happily Ever After, Combining Work, Marriage, and Kids Successfully. And that's an ambitious promise. Because I want you to be both successful and happy. And there are many paths to happiness. I've shared with you mine. It's certainly not the only one. Everyone, you each will have to find your own path. But I'll just leave you with a handful of suggestions on how to find that. Just recap. First, remember that service is not the same thing as subservient. There's nothing wrong with service. In fact, it's a wonderful, uplifting path. Be the hardest working person in the room. It's actually not that hard. And if you do it, you will get noticed, and you will go further. And you will gain you will put together a path that will then permit you to have more opportunities later. Do what you love, no matter what your job is. Find the things in that job that you love. There's always going to be something in a job that you love. And if there isn't, then it's time to get a different job. Choose a great husband and work hard at being a good wife. Make sure the people that you love know that you think they're amazing. Remember that life is a stew, and you can combine work and marriage and kids all together. And remember, above all, that being successful is not a guarantee of happiness. But happiness is, I think, the best definition of success. Thank you. Questions? I can answer questions about, well, who knows, virtually anything. Questions about book publishing and questions about leadership. Yes?
Hi. So my question is, I know a lot of feminists, especially on campus, will tell you that having a job, having a career, and having a family kind of takes away your femininity. And I know most of us in this room disagree with that, but how would you just kind of sum it up? Because sometimes when you're faced with that, you get all flustered. So how do you address that kind of concisely?
Concisely is a high challenge, a high bar.
Or in a way that they can understand.
You're right.
Because sometimes when you use conservative lingo, they just kind of...
I know. Yeah. I agree. Well, I think that feminism clearly has been hijacked. I think feminism is very important, but it means being feminine. And I think it's ironic and a little ludicrous that feminists think that feminism is being not a woman. So I don't get that at all. But I think the people, the women who are, there are many, many women, and I encourage you all to follow in this path, who are very successful at many things by celebrating the strengths that they have as women, not hiding them. And I think actually the women oftentimes who are the most successful are not the most masculine, tough women. They're usually not the most successful. It's the women who are feminine and who utilize the strengths that we have as women, which are different from the strengths that men have, to carve our path to success.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you so much. You're very, very informative, and I love hearing you talk about being able to balance both being a mother and a wife and also your job, and you're so successful. I wonder, in this day of age where, 40 or 50% of marriages fail, and a lot of people attribute it to the women that I've talked to, at least my friends' mothers, who said they chose their career over their husband, and that's one of the reasons that they were divorced. I was just wondering what possibly your response would be to that, and just going forward as young women, as we don't have much to look forward to when the majority of our parents are divorced.
Right. Well, I think a number of things. I mean, I know certainly a lot of women who have divorced, and my own experience is that it is much more often a breakdown of the interpersonal relationship and kind of had nothing to do with either one of their jobs. I think when careers get blamed for a breakup of a marriage, it's really, in my opinion, a situation where one or both spouses didn't value what the other spouse did. And so if one spouse starts to resent the other spouse's job, whether it's the time they spend at the job or the passion they devote to the job, that's where a relationship breaks down. But I think you can look at people who have really demanding jobs and have wonderful marriages, and then you can look at people who have really demanding jobs and their marriage broke up. I don't think it's the demanding job. I think it's the respect that each spouse has for what the other person does, and the willingness to willingness on both parts to share that success and be part of that success. So whether if you're a stay-at-home mom and your husband has a high-powered job, well, you still have a big involvement in your husband's job, and vice versa. If you're a husband who's at home and your wife is going out and doing the job, you still play a big part in that. So I think it has more to do with whether both spouses respect what the other person is doing than sort of the demands of the job. Because I think if you have that mutual respect, and I think it's got to go both ways, then one person's success is both people's success, and one person's hardship or conflict or challenge is owned by both of you. But also you don't have the sort of resentment going back and forth over spending time or attention or passion on something else. Yes?
I'll just speak.
Oh, sorry. Here it comes.
Thank you. What advice can you give to the young ladies in this room? I know most of us are in the latter part of our college career, and some, me being one of them, I'm sure other girls in this room do too, have really serious boyfriends who are also about to finish up their college career. What advice can you give to us who are kind of in this situation where we may be going not necessarily in opposite directions career-wise, but opposite directions geographically-wise? Yeah, what advice can you give to us who may have or may be encountering this issue within the next upcoming year?
It's a really hard issue. A lot of my oldest daughter's friends are navigating that right now. My oldest daughter graduated from college in 2012, and she has a lot of friends in that situation. I think it is hard. I think that it's sort of a little too easy to say, well, if you really love each other, it'll all work out. But I also think that life really is full of trade-offs and compromises and hard decisions. And so I think if you're really very serious and you believe that this person might be the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, then I encourage you to find a way to keep your relationship going. There are plenty of people I know that have kept relationships going for 2 or 3 years or even longer, not being in the same city. And that can work. And especially as you're starting your career, you might be really busy in your career, and it might be okay for you each to be in a different city, or one person to be working and one person to be in grad school, and keep that relationship going. And I do actually think that if you're both equally committed to the relationship, that can work. At the same time, you look at your different options, and if that is a really important factor in your future happiness, you may decide to take a job in the same place, or try to be close enough where you could each hop on the train or the bus and get to each other quickly. So I think it can work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more question.
Yes. I'm going to say one more thing, sorry, and then I'll take the question. My wonderful cousin Rachel, who had the little tacking thing, also said her advice to her sons is her oldest son just started college, and he thought a girl was kind of interested, and he said, what do you think about a girl if she just seems interested? And she said, hold out for enthusiasm. And I think that's an excellent slogan. Hold out for enthusiasm. Yes, question.
I think a lot of us in this room are probably really driven and want to have a really strong career, and also be a mom just like you. I have heard I've worked for women in the past who have young children and say that they feel almost a sense of guilt sometimes dropping their kids off at daycare or whatever that may be. Have you ever experienced that, and how do you overcome that challenge?
That's a great question. And I think, yes, I think every working mother feels guilty at some point. There's going to be something that you don't get to do with your daughter or son because of your job. So I think, again, life isn't perfect. And I think you have to be prepared to say, I'm going to look for the way to get the most out of being a parent and give the most to my kids that I possibly can, and still have a career. And I am the living example. I definitely think that's possible, that's doable. I think you can your kids can grow up to be amazing people, and you can have a wonderful relationship with them. I think every individual situation is different. So you have to find the right daycare, the right provider. You might decide somebody coming to your house is better than going out. Your husband and you may be able to divide up the time so that he's home sometime, you're home sometime. You might have a family member, or you might have a next door neighbor who is also going to work, and your kids love playing together and you can share. And there are lots of good solutions to making sure that your kids are really happy and well cared for. And then, the important thing is definitely making sure that when you are with your kids, you are really engaged in what they're doing. So that can be exhausting, and it is, but that's good. You're young, you can do it. And you can. You can throw yourself into that other full-time job of being a mom when you're with them, and every minute that you're with them, you can be doing that. And like I said, I think if you kind of involve them in your job and talk about what you do, they feel grown up. They get a sense of appreciating and valuing what you do rather than resenting what you do. And that can help too. All right. Thank you very much.